Now it's my pleasure to call on the chair of the day, Richard Parker, to more fully introduce today's speaker. Thank you.
It's my pleasure to introduce Jonathan Spears to you. Jonathan is the CEO of one of the most important agencies in the Victorian Public Service. Infrastructure Victoria has an unusual role. It's empowered and required to provide independent advice to government on the state's infrastructure requirements. This is a very wide brief and a politically sensitive role, as the agency is empowered to publish reports on infrastructure policies and projects which may well differ from the views of the government of the day. Some questions on those issues might be relevant. Jonathan is extremely well qualified, as he has held senior roles in central agencies in Victoria, so he knows what the sausage machine looks like and is like inside. But he holds a string of postgraduate qualifications, including a PhD, Master of Public Administration, Master of Laws, Bachelor of Laws, Bachelor of Arts, and is also a legal practitioner. Could you please welcome Jonathan to the podium?
Great. Thank you very much. That very kind introduction, Richard, and great to be with you all this afternoon. I would like to talk to you today about a particular aspect of Infrastructure Victoria's work, but I'm looking forward to a no-holds-barred Q&A later on, which I'm told you're all well equipped for. So looking forward to that. Thank you. Before I go any further, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting, the Wurundjeri people, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and any who might be with us today. The other thing I'd like to do actually is just acknowledge Trevor's presentation. That was really interesting. Yesterday, I was out at the Western Treatment Plant, which we've had for about 160 years or so, an amazing bit of infrastructure. And it does put sanitation in a different context in terms of the infrastructure we have, and then some that the Rotary Club is working with. And so I think that's always something really helpful to keep in perspective. We always want better infrastructure around. We're always having a contest about what's next and what's more. Really great to see the work Rotary is doing with organisations and communities like that as well. So Richard's giving you a bit of a sense of Infrastructure Victoria, but I'll give you maybe a bit more, because then that'll make more sense in terms of what I'm presenting to you. So we're the state's independent infrastructure advisor. We've been around since about 2015. We're created by an Act of Parliament. We've got an independent board that I'm responsible to, which is made up of largely very experienced people with business and academic and community experience, and some secretaries of some government departments as well. Really importantly, while we are part of the broader portfolio that sits under the Treasurer can't direct us as to what we say and what we do. And that means, as Richard was saying, sometimes we say things that aren't government policy. We also direct our work to the government of the day, but also to all parties of the Parliament. And so I'm one of those rare public servants that gets to meet with the opposition or the Greens or minor parties as well, and brief them about work that we do. And we think that's really important as we think about the longer run planning that we need to do in some of those big issues that the state is facing, where infrastructure touches on many of our lives now and into the future. We do that through three main things: a 30-year infrastructure strategy that we release every few years, and we've done that twice, and we're getting ready to release the updates to that strategy next year. Independent advice to government. So sometimes government says, we've got a really tricky problem that we're not quite sure what to do with. Infrastructure Victoria, can you do this? So I'll ask us things like, how do we navigate the transition of our gas system to be net zero, or what to make of automated vehicles, just to give you a couple of examples. And we do research. So we do work on areas that we and my team and my board think are important things for us to be injecting into the public conversation and the quality of evidence for all parties to use. And that's the work that I'm going to talk to you about today, this work around choosing Victoria's future. we are a very independent organisation. So if you're interested in what I'm talking about today, you'll find our reports, and unusually all the technical reports. Some of them are even by GHD, but also lots of GHD's competitors too, I might add. So we open up all of that underlying information for everybody to see, which is quite unusual, I think. And we're quite open about what we do and don't know and the assumptions we've made. We also do crazy things like talk to real people, thousands of real people sometimes, about what they think are the big issues and what they think are good solutions for infrastructure, and engage with a lot of peak bodies, industry bodies, to get their perspectives as well. And while I do have some engineers in my team, be rest assured, it's actually a very diverse team. So it's a range of perspectives we bring to our work. So I've got social scientists, I've got economists, I've got communications people, I've got land use planners, and I've got architects, even the odd lost lawyer, who are bringing together multiple perspectives in the work we do. So this work around choosing Victoria's future might sound like a really grandiose title, but it's one that we thought about long and hard over a number of years. Because we as a state have been growing really rapidly in recent years, and we've been growing in a particular trajectory. And what we, of course, know in our heart of hearts is that this all comes about from choice. There's not some determinism as to how Victoria chooses to grow. We make choices explicitly or implicitly about the way, in particular, our cities will grow. And that makes a really big difference to the infrastructure we need, which was why we were interested in this. But it also makes a big difference to our social and our economic and our environmental performance and what our lives and the lives of future generations are going to be like. So you can quibble about the rate at which Australia and Victoria can grow, and you see, of course, that the federal government's making some tweaks to the dial in the budget about how many people are coming in. But the reality is Australia, in particular Victoria, and especially Melbourne and our regional cities, are and will remain really attractive places to be. So we can be in denial about this and say, close the gates, people aren't coming. But the reality is that's not a very constructive approach. Our approach to this work has been, we're going to have about 1 million more people coming to Victoria every decade for the next 3 decades. So where are they going to go? And they're really big choices because it's going to make quite a difference to the future of Victoria. We did this through a scenario-based approach. So you're probably familiar with this, I suspect. But so this isn't about us getting our crystal ball out and going, we see into the future and it's going to be exactly X or Y. But rather what we were doing is looking at different outcomes that we might have under different assumptions and testing that and modeling that. Because what that does is it doesn't necessarily mean we have a perfect way that we want to be, but rather it gives us a guide as to the direction we might want to head. And so we explored 5 different scenarios, and I'll describe them too. And if you're interested in this, I'd recommend you jump onto our wonderful website, where you will see a very engaging video that actually explains some of these scenarios in a bit more detail. So the first scenario we looked at is what we call a dispersed city. So that is, Melbourne takes most of that 3 million people growth over the next 3 decades, and most of it's accommodated on the edges of Melbourne in our greenfield growth areas. And some of it is also accommodated in places like Geelong and Ballarat and Bendigo on the edge of those cities. So we tested that. Now, does that sound like a familiar scenario? It should, because that's what we've been doing for a couple of decades now. So the question is that the path we should continue? The second scenario is one we call consolidated city. So this is one in which, sure, there continues to be some growth on the edges of our cities in our greenfield suburbs. We know from our research that some people are always going to want to live like that and they should have that choice. But maybe it's not the only choice. So what if we actually unlocked a lot of the middle suburbs of Melbourne, Geelong, Ballarat, Bendigo for more people to live in medium density housing? What does that look like? And that might sound a bit familiar because there's been a lot of discussion about that in the media over the last year, and you may have even heard me talking about that. So that's a spoiler alert, perhaps, for what I'm going to say later. But that's also what the Victorian government's Plan Melbourne objective or aspiration has been in the last few years. It's just that we've been not very near achieving it. We've been missing that by a mile. The third scenario we tested is we call compact city. So what if lots of people choose to live in a much more high-rise contexts in the centre of Melbourne? Still some people in the middle suburbs and growth areas at the edge, but what if high-rise development took a lot more of our growth? That's probably a less likely outcome. I said these are scenarios, they're not predictions of the future. It would be a very big change to the way we live, but we do look around the world and see some people do choose to live that way. So it's a test to see, well, what difference does that make? The other dialogue that goes around quite a lot in my world of infrastructure and planning is, let's send everyone down the road. Let's send everyone to Geelong or Ballarat or Bendigo. Let's accommodate all the growth there. I mean, nothing wrong with those places. In fact, I grew up in Geelong, so I've got a cat in this game. So what we tested is if those regional cities were to grow so 3 times bigger or 3 times more than they're currently planned to grow under normal projections. What does that look like for those cities, but also the state as a whole? And last but not least, we tested a scenario called distributed state. So what if everyone gets the whole tree change thing in a really big way? What if lots of people live in small regional towns and our regional cities, much more than is currently predicted? What does that look like? Okay, so we did a whole lot of economic modelling, land use modelling, transport modelling, environmental and social modelling. And because I'm not going to be here all afternoon, I'm not going to present all those results to you. But if you're interested in that, there's a lot more on our website. What you can see here is that we looked at what are those social, economic, and environmental outcomes that you get under each of those scenarios in a quantitative way. And no one's really done this before in Victoria, to line up different scenarios like this and go, well, where are they good? Where are they not so good? And you can see behind me, the red is not so good. The dark blue is pretty good. Light blue or light pink is not so good, not so bad. And so the overall pattern you'll see there is that we've got these consolidated and compact city scenarios are getting us overall better results. The dispersed city, the pathway we're on, is not so great, particularly economically and environmentally. And some of those solutions about sending everybody down the road or living all over the state don't look so great either on a lot of the indicators we've got. Now, each scenario has advantages and disadvantages. There's no perfect scenario, and we didn't expect that there would be, and we didn't cook the books, if you like, to create a perfect scenario in this. But what we do see is more compact cities perform better. So not continuing sprawl at the edge of our cities as the only way we accommodate growth gives better economic, social, and environmental performance. It also gives people much greater housing choice. And that's something from our other research we know is sorely lacking. Economically, Victoria performs better with more compact cities, like tens of billions of dollars more. And so if you've been staying up late, sweating over the federal budget, I know you probably all have been, one of the things that treasurers and economists are always after is productivity growth, the secret sauce in economics. And so this is one of the things that more compact cities give us is greater productivity growth. Now, please don't think I'm saying we all need to live in high-rise towers. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that slowing the growth at the edges of our cities, unlocking greater housing opportunities in the middle bands of our cities, that is a pathway that is likely to give us some of these better results. It'll result in a lot lower emissions as well. It will mean some changes to the way we live and some changes to the policies that we've been living under and have become used to. And that's really the opportunity that we all have now. So we are actually at a point of choosing Victoria's future because the state government is currently got update to its planning policies. They're talking about releasing a new plan for Victoria and a number of other housing and policy statements. And you only need to open the paper or watch the news to see the pressure that there is on housing and housing affordability. And that's definitely relevant to these choices. The other thing is that we find infrastructure costs in more compact cities are lower, tens of billions of dollars lower. We make a lot better use of the existing infrastructure we have, and we provide better service with that infrastructure when we have more compact cities. And to be honest, it gives us a bit of a chance to catch up with our infrastructure spend in those areas where we have been allowing to grow and that we know is a lag in the infrastructure at the edges of our cities currently. How much is that? Well, we worked it out that it's between $20,000 and $60,000 cheaper per house if we have a more compact city. So when you multiply that out by the many, many homes we're going to have to build for that sort of 3 million more people over coming decades, that's a really big opportunity to take. But to be honest, I don't think that's the prime reason why we should make a choice for a more compact city. It's the better economic, social, and environmental outcomes that we should be seeking to get. It just happens that infrastructure is a big unlocker for that, and housing choice is a big unlocker for that, and will save a lot of money. So we've made some recommendations to the Victorian government. And as Richard has said, some of these aren't actually government policy currently. That's our role, is to point this out to government and to other parties of the parliament as well. Because what's important is that we have a broader understanding of the choices and trade-offs that we're making. So our recommendation is that the new plan for Victoria should seek to reinforce established area growth, both in Melbourne but in our regional cities too. And that will include things like setting targets for where new housing is to go in each local government area, and having some growth boundaries for those cities that don't have them yet. And we should be using those targets for our planning, but also in our infrastructure investment as well. We should be developing infrastructure plans that are long-term plans that will actually achieve those more compact cities. And it might be a shock to you to know that that's not necessarily the way Victorian government plans currently aim. You may not even know what they are because they're not published. And that means the ability to then harness private infrastructure investment and housing investment and local government efforts is hampered by the lack of that transparency of plans. We've also recommended significant changes to the way financial incentives shape people's choices. There's a whole other bit of research we published called Our Home Choices that looked and modelled this in detail. And what we find is things like infrastructure contributions regime that we currently have, first homeowner grants, and a number of other regulations are actually pushing people and incentivising people to buy homes in the green fields of our cities, even though that's actually contrary to government policy, current government policy, and contrary to achieving the benefits of more compact cities. We've also pointed out that regional cities have particular requirements that we need to have a close eye to. They have particular water and energy and telecommunication requirements in particular that government needs to focus on to enable them to grow and be economically vibrant. And that there's a real opportunity as our cities grow to have lower carbon construction of our buildings, because That's one of the things, if we continue on the path we are, a lot of our future emissions are going to be embodied and embedded in the buildings that we're building, and that lasts a very long time. So Victoria's cities do need to be more compact and better connected if we're going to give people access to jobs and services and the good infrastructure that everybody wants. And we're, as I observed earlier, we're in a really lucky position to have really great infrastructure. It's just that it's very unevenly distributed, perhaps not as unevenly distributed as it is in the Philippines. The current pathway of growth that we're on delivers worse quality of life and opportunities for Victoria compared to what we could choose in terms of seeking to have more compact cities. But if we're going to do that, the Victorian government's going to need to change some of its policies, as I've described, but also work with local governments and businesses and communities to actually help influence the shape of our cities. With that, I'm really looking forward to any questions you've got or any comments you have, both about what I presented, but also, you know, the broader work that Infrastructure Victoria does.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was brilliant. We have a few minutes for questions, about 7, and we'd like an orderly process. So over to
John Saunders. It appears to me that there is a direct parallel between your department and the department reflected in the television series Utopia. Are you able to confirm my suspicion that your relationship with the government in Victoria is the same as the relationship with the national government in Utopia?
I've never had that question asked of me before. No, I'm just kidding. But that's as funny as I'll be about Utopia. Great show for a whole range of reasons. I really enjoy Utopia, and I can comprehensively put to bed any suspicion you might have about particularly the level of political shenanigans that you see in Utopia. And that, to be honest, it makes a really, really big difference. So I talked at the start about our independence. That's real. So I don't have ministerial advisors calling me up night and day, telling me what we should be writing. And we don't deliver projects either. So we give because it's very difficult to be the independent advisors on long-term planning if you're also got really strong incentives and day-to-day delivery of project and project pipelines. So while I enjoy Utopia as much as, perhaps more than most people, the reality of our independence, both the legal reality, at the board level, and frankly, our culture of independence is such that we're not under the thumb of government, if that's your concern. And you can, if you don't believe me, talk to the opposition, talk to the Greens, talk to the media, or actually talk to the government.
Just before I hand it over to Peter, Bob, I know that you've got your hand up there, but you're on mute and our computer is with the speaker, so it's just a little bit tricky for us to take your question.
So, Jonathan, Peter here. Is your recommendations that it's a big Melbourne, and is there a place for the regional cities at all, such as where you came from, Geelong?
Yeah, great question. So the scenarios that we've modelled have the same total number of people in Victoria for a start with, and that's an important thing to keep in mind. So they're not differences across them. There is absolutely a role for regional cities, and this work calls it out. So what our findings are is that really increasing the population of Geelong, Ballarat, Bendigo, sort of 3 times more than is planned, is probably not the best pathway, either for the state or for those cities. It would fundamentally change the nature of and the appeal of those cities. But they are planned to grow, and they should. And they'll grow really well if we put some boundaries around the degree to which they sprawl. And if we enable more housing in their established areas, because they've got lots of opportunity too. And if we do some of the things that we know they really need. So, for example, I said their particular water and energy needs that those cities have got to service both the population growth, but also economic growth. The other really big piece is public transport in those cities is often very, very low levels currently. So they just need more buses more quickly, actually. And while a lot of attention gets put on high-speed trains between regional cities and Melbourne, actually upgrading their public transport infrastructure would be really helpful, combined with enabling greater density in those cities too.
Jonathan, Richard Dent, there's an inherent paradox between our political system where there's elections every 3 or 4 years and infrastructure, which is multi-generational.
Yeah.
What's the role of your agency and the government and business and community organisations like ours to make sure that community voice is heard throughout this and thinking intergenerationally rather than just electoral cycle?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Richard. And we've learned a few lessons along the way. We're up to our third version of our 30-year infrastructure strategy. And so I'll tell you one lesson we learned is we say to the government, in 30 years' time, we recommend you do something. They say, yep, cool, no worries, see you then. But more seriously, what we've learned is that not just governments, many of us find it difficult to make decisions that are really long way out, right? But it's actually not that hard to agree on what some key objectives are and key directions are we should be going. And so we actually spend quite a lot of time consulting with community and stakeholders about, well, what are those key objectives? And last year we actually convened a forum of young people who are aged between 15 and 25 and spent several days with them, talking to them about what do they think the key objectives are that the state should be seeking to achieve over the next 30 years. Because funnily enough, they've got more skin in the game than we have. And they told us some interesting things. You know, they weren't particularly interested in big mega projects. They weren't even all that interested in economic development. They do want jobs. They were very interested in having services that meet their needs now and in the short run. They were very interested in sustainability and quite concerned about real effects of climate change and housing. They're really concerned, unsurprisingly, about housing. So in a practical sense, what that means for us when we're giving government advice is we're having that long run view too about what we should be trying to achieve. But you'll see in the next version of our strategy, we'll be telling government, well, what are the things that they need to be doing in the next 5 years that get us on the pathway there? Because they're things that government can act on and community and business can act on as well. They're investments that they can start to make or plan for. They're policy changes they can make and service changes they can make, rather than it being stuff that's way out there. Yeah, you know, the founders of the Western Treatment Plant are still going today. You know, after 160 years, probably weren't doing a 30-year strategy. They were probably thinking longer, but they developed that in chunks as well. Thanks, Richard.
Mary Berry. I just want to pick up on the public transport issue. I'm aware that and I'm giving you an example, in Fisherman's Bend, which is meant to house over 80,000 people in the next 10 or 20 years, there was a plan in 2018 to have all this public transport in place by 2022. It's now 2024 and it hasn't even started.
Yep.
So what are the implications for people living in these areas down the track if the government is not going to listen to you and put public transport as a #1 issue? You've got more and more cars, you've got apartment buildings with not enough parking spots for everybody, you've got parking on the street, et cetera, and it's getting very dire. So how do we address this issue?
Yeah, Mary, that's a great question. And I think Fisherman's Bend is a really good example where if you don't line up infrastructure investment with your aspirations about how, especially precincts like that, are going to change, then you're unlikely to achieve them. And so we have done modelling that's published and out there for everyone to see that shows that you know, tram connections. And there's, for those of you who are familiar with Fisherman's Bend, there's a sort of southern and northern tram connection, and the northern one is the one close to the river. You know, that's the one that's likely to unlock a lot of jobs, particularly early investment, and give certainty to investors and big anchor tenants, and also unlock housing development too. So we're very clear that in the absence of that kind of investment, we're not going to get that level of development in Fisherman's Bend. And there'll be a missed opportunity, because there is, as I think you said, you know, 80,000 homes, 80,000 jobs there, really well located. So our recommendation to government has been to invest in the first instance in both better buses and tram connections. And in the medium term, we probably need a rail connection. That's a long and complicated story I won't bore everybody with, about transport modelling and cost benefit analysis. It's tricky, but it's a good example of us. If we have a gap between our land use planning aspirations and our infrastructure aspirations, we're not going to achieve it.
Well, can I just speak for everyone to say thank you, Jonathan? And what I have to say is, what you're seeing here with someone like Jonathan and the process that he's running is outstanding integrity of a policy-making process. And that's to be valued, and it sits us above many parts of the world for sure. So thank you, Jonathan.